this is the outcome of substantial amounts of work that NCR has been doing. It's part of a continuum of work that we expect to do over the next few years. And there's a combination of concerns about skilling, but of course, underlying it is the deeper concern about jobs and finding good jobs for all the working age population of India. Dr. K.P. Krishnan is on his way, but he has asked that we proceed because he was held up at the last minute. And we are also missing our second guest, Manisha Chadda, who is the head of philanthropy for JP Morgan, which has very generously supported this work over the last 2 years. She is also on her way with a delayed flight from Mumbai. So both our guests will be here shortly. But I thought we might start in the interest of time. I want to introduce Dr. Bonali Bhandari, who is really the team leader of the work on skills. And I'm also very grateful to the Ministry for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship for co-sponsoring this release. As you can see on the program, that this is a joint event which the Ministry of Skill Development and we are hosting today. I should also mention that this is the first time we are using this auditorium. This is a new facility that NCR has created. And so if there are any glitches, please bear with us. Hopefully they've been ironed out. And I hope you like the new ambiance of this new auditorium that we are very proud of and we hope to use a lot. One of the challenges in doing this work was simply to think for ourselves, what are we going to say that's new? Skilling is a subject that's been really looked at very intensively, and there's a very large industry, as I'm sure those of you who are either in the industry or study the industry know. There's a very large industry around skilling, both in the private sector, but of course with the huge efforts that this government has now been making in the skilling area, also a huge public sector involvement. And it's wonderful to see many people here who are part of both sides of the equation. So we really wanted and worked very hard to think about what's new that we could say. And one of the early decisions Dr. Bhandari and her team made was that we need to simplify. We need to go back to first principles as much as possible. And in doing that, hopefully we will discover some new truths or at least some new ideas for how we might crack the skilling challenge. So with that, let me just welcome Bonali to the stage. We are going to do this together. And with your permission, start the presentation. Bonali, why don't you come and take a seat? And during the course of the discussion, we'll introduce other members of the team. We're very glad that some people who've left NCR have come back for this event, but who are part of this team. So we'll introduce them at the end. So we call this No Time to Lose, and behind that, of course, is Poet Laureate Rabindranath Tagore's lines that have motivated us. And there is an additional line. This was written in 1912. There's an additional line which says something like, "We are too poor to lose time." Of course, India is not that poor as it was 106 years back. We've made huge strides. But at the same time, we have so much more to do and so much more potential that we really have no time to lose. So the sense of urgency underlies all that we have done here. Here's just a preview of what we hope to show you today. There's urgent skilling needs. I think we all know about that. But there's also a skilling paradox, and there's great uncertainty about where manufacturing, services, the new workplace, where is all that taking us? So we are at a particularly challenging time where there is a huge issue with the backlog of skills that we need to be dealing with. At the same time, the future looks very uncertain. We'll talk a little bit about that. I think the sense of urgency comes a lot from what we internally at NCR always call India must get rich before it gets old. Why do I say that? And I'll show you some pictures to demonstrate that. Because we are a very young population, the world's largest young population at the moment. We will be the world's largest working age population, and eventually we will be the world's largest senior citizen population. And in order to be able to cope with that, we need to have a sense of urgency. We also characterize, as a whole, this issue of moving from baskets to bites, which in a sense captures the big challenge that we face. In looking at that, we're going to talk a little bit about a vicious cycle of low skills and few good jobs, which reinforces itself and ends us in a low kind of level equilibrium, which of course is something that we want to break out of. And we want to break out of that into a virtuous circle, which of course has good skilling, which then leads to a good employment, lots of new good jobs, which then of course further enhances the skills capability of our working age population. I said when I began that we're going to simplify, and we're going to try and step back from the kind of hurly-burly of the skilling industry and the very large skilling industry. And the first step we take there is to simplify skill definitions. We break things down and then try to combine them in ways in which, when you start thinking about it in that way, you are able to deal with a lot of complexity, but with very simple elements that can be put together. So that's the first step that we take. And then the second step involves a three-part framework. We call it a triad, where we talk about the acquisition of skills, we talk about the matching of skills with jobs, and most importantly, for today's day and age, the anticipation of skills to come. So we think that this three-part framework gives us the ability to parse a lot of the experiences we've had so far, a lot of the experiences in the skilling world that we are having now, and of course the future. And so we use this to great effect throughout the report. The urgency of skilling really doesn't need to be re-emphasized to anybody. The ministry is on record saying it. The Economist puts it very pithily: India's labor force will soon overtake China's as the world's largest. The country is struggling to generate opportunities for a workforce with the wrong skills. And that kind of captures the nub of the problem. Here are some numbers that show you the scale of the issues that we are dealing with something like 70 million workers entering the labor force between now and 2022. Welcome, Manisha. I told you that we would show you a little bit about the demography of India, and this graph really shows you that in 2020, in 2 years' time, will roughly be half and half working age population and half dependents on either side of that working age population. That then very nicely goes down to 46 dependents per 54 workers by about 2040. And thereafter, of course, the number of dependents starts increasing, and we are out of that demographic dividend golden age, which most countries, of course, greatly benefit from, and every country only has one chance at it. And of course, then in the end, you become an aging society. So we have this gap, and already there's a big difference between the south of India and the north of India. The north of India is much younger. The south of India is already closing that demographic gap, and their demographic transition is ebbing. This is just the average for the entire country. But we have this golden opportunity, and here again, this is the whole point about we must get rich before we get old, because if we do get rich, which means that the average Indian citizen or resident gets the kind of good job that allows she or he to earn well, to save well, to accumulate wealth, and then that, of course, makes us a society quite able and willing to deal with our old age as well. This is the skilling paradox, and we tried to find a graphic that really epitomizes this. I was talking to the CTO of IBM, and he said that we have more engineers in India than everywhere else in the world put together. So that's the top end of what we can do and should be doing. And of course, we also, unfortunately, lie around in baskets very often. without the right skills to be able to get to those kinds of jobs or even close to those kinds of jobs. And the scale is vast, but then the potential is vast as well, because that's the way we would prefer to look at it. But the scale is very, very difficult, and you can see the numbers, the school attainment, the literacy rates, formal vocational training. It just shows you the very large effort that will need to be made to catch up and to be able to provide the opportunities for India to get rich before it gets old. Our skilling system is vast. You can't really see the numbers, but in your report there's a much larger graphic showing you how, starting from K-12 on to higher education and university, in the first column we have our education system, and then the way it spreads through our employment and labor market system as you go from academic to technical to vocational to on the job, and then you end up in the job market. So the numbers are really phenomenally large. No other country has had these kinds of numbers. So the fact that it's difficult to meet this challenge is not at all hard to explain, especially given the neglect of schooling, K-12 schooling, that India unfortunately has had to suffer in the years from the 50s onwards, when we focused largely on higher education but did not think about the foundations of what we had to do to feed that higher education system. So I talked about moving from baskets to bites, and the problem here is that the transition has been slow from agriculture to unregistered informal firms, and then of course to a variety of different sized firms. And you can see that in the fact that we are still only 15% in manufacturing, and yet still about 50% in agriculture, which is declining, of course. Another aspect of this is the informality of our labor force, with 92% informal and just 8% formal. So how do you move from baskets to bites? Again, very simplistically, it's to skill our informal workers, move them into formal jobs, particularly women who, as we know, have a very low participation rate, indeed declining in urban areas in recent years, a phenomenon that is still struggling to be explained by the evidence. We have different alternative explanations, but none that really is yet the clincher that we know is the reason why. But once you skill these informal workers, you move them into more formal jobs, you transform the informal from a vice to a virtue. Why? Because informality is also a huge safety net in our country. It provides the kind of income that otherwise would be impossible, whether it's through entrepreneurship or through non-contractual, very informal, very, very untied kind of work that is happening. I'd just like to recognize Dr. K.P. Krishnan. Thank you, Dr. Krishnan. We've started just because you were very familiar with the report, so we took the liberty of doing so. So transforming the informal to more formal employment, but even changing the characteristics of the informal sector so that we no longer see it as a residual that somehow has to be dealt with. We want to actually see that as the silver lining to the cloud, that we have this, and of course our informality is very different from the informality of Southern California and the gig economy. But we need to think about how we can bridge that gap between our kind of informality and, of course, the informality that is at the very cutting edge of the new nature of work. And, of course, because of the scale, this has also been very difficult and slow. And so why? Well, it's not very hard to understand. There are lots of facts that explain it. These are just some renditions of those facts. In almost every sector, we have a preponderance of the uneducated or the low educated. And that's a serious problem for us when you're thinking of artificial intelligence and how we will cope with that kind of a world that requires cognitive and non-cognitive skills that are really yet not mainstreamed in our education system. Looking at it from the firm end of things, we often think about leapfrogging with technology. But when you look at the numbers, small and medium-sized firms are not yet really digitally engaged. and the proportions that, again, I think you can see here, but you can see in your reports, are not that promising, and we have a great deal yet to do. Of course, we have the great advantage of the penetration of cell phones and smartphones and increasing internet connectivity, which should help. But again, without the foundations of a serious K-12 cognitive, non-cognitive, problem-solving education, we are handicapped, and we need to deal with that. So one of the explanations that I talked about why we have this low transition is primarily because of what we think is a vicious cycle of low skilling and then a series of things that lead to the low availability of good jobs. And we've tried to show this here with slow growth of good formal jobs leads to informality, which leads to low incentives to acquire skills, both on the part of the worker as well as the firm. So there are more poorly skilled and fewer well-skilled workers, which then leads to a higher cost-effective cost of labor relative to capital. More capital-intensive methods are being deployed. You can see that already in some of our leading industries. And then, of course, that leads to a slower growth of more formal jobs. And the cycle tends to feed on itself in the way in which we try to describe here. How can we move from this to a virtuous circle which allows us to provide the right kinds of skills that then get matched to the right kinds of jobs, which then, of course, lead to more better jobs and more skilling and so on. And this is something that we want to talk about during the course of this presentation, but also it's very much there as the core of our report. We think it needs a multi-pronged effort, some which are very obvious. You skill the workforce, but you also deal with the informality in our workforce in a more creative way. We need to undo a lot of the dysfunctional regulations, both in labor markets, but also in things like industrial laws, even land acquisition laws, which are preventing, even though the big push on ease of doing business, are preventing businesses from expanding as they might. We want to invest in job promoting sectors. As part of this work, we've done an exercise that looks at where is the greatest potential for job creation, whether direct job creation or indirect job creation. So, for example, hospitality creates jobs in that sector, but it leads to a whole knock-on set of job creations in other sectors that are feeding the hospitality sector. So we need to think about both the direct and the indirect job creating potential of these sectors. And finally, of course, we want workers to have the skills that find them jobs, employers to find the workers they need, and both, of course, anticipating the future. And this speaks to the portability of skills that the report emphasizes we should be promoting. So the report is a lot about moving from this vicious cycle to a virtuous circle. And in doing that, we talk about this three-part framework: the acquisition of skills, the matching of skills, and the anticipating of skills. I said we started out on this issue of acquiring skills by trying to simplify. And we think of skills in this report as just consisting of three basic elements: cognitive, technical and vocational, and social and behavioral. You're all familiar with these terms, but when you think about them in this simple way, then when you combine them, you end up with the kinds of attributes of a modern worker, a woman or a man, who is able to find jobs in a modern sector, in a formal sector, by combining these skills. So, for example, combining cognitive and technical and vocational leads to the kinds of things that are labeled there: programming, monitoring, designing, troubleshooting, quality control skills. Similarly, social and behavioral and technical and vocational combined in the right way lead to problem solving and organizational skills. There are attitudinal approaches to skilling that a modern workforce and modern workplace require, which usually are a combination of cognitive and social and behavioral. And of course, when you combine all of these things together, then you get entrepreneurship type skills, which are motivational, which are vision, resilience, ability to withstand risk and mitigate it. Those are things that come into play. So we work on the skilling needs of society by thinking in these simple blocks or circles or Venn diagrams and then allowing us to think about, when you look at a scheme or a program, how are these basics being catered to in that kind of a framework. We then think about the three basic combinations that we need: foundational skills, employability skills, and entrepreneurial skills. These are the ways in which, again, we can look at new ideas, new policies, new programs, and this simple framework allows us to kind of rate these policies in terms of whether they have the right kinds of foundation, employability, or entrepreneurial skills. A lot of our skilling programs today focus on the initial entry into the workforce, but whether they sustain the worker beyond that initial entry is a large question. And again, thinking about it in these simple terms makes you ask those questions about how we are catering for the long-term employability of the worker. A key element of what we say in the report is that we really have to work through each of these elements: the acquisition, the matching, and the anticipating. If you don't do that, if you focus only, for example, on the acquisition, then you have very poor job placement. And it's very important in designing our schemes and new ideas that we wish to promulgate both in the public sector and in public-private partnerships to be thinking about each element of this framework. What we do in the report is we take some of the largest schemes that are currently in existence. You really can't read this, but it's in your report. And we rate them on how good they are at acquiring, matching, and anticipating. And we look at it in terms of the design that was initially adopted, the implementation of the scheme, and then, of course, the impact. And as you will see in your report, most of the boxes that we tick are on the acquisition side, very few on the matching, and even fewer on the anticipating. And it's really important at this inflection point where we are currently, with a huge legacy and a huge potential yet to be realized, but also great uncertainty about the future. And in that inflection point, I think it's important to be thinking about all three elements of this triad. Here are some examples of kind of a short-term, medium, and long-term agenda that we should be looking at. Some, again, are very obvious. Obviously, ensure that children are literate and numerate, and a range of other things in the acquisition of skills, then in matching, and there are overlaps, of course, between matching and the anticipation of skills. A key issue is the portability of skills, because the more portable these skills are, the greater we will be moving away from lifetime employment to lifetime employability, which is really where we need to be able to realize the potential and to provide the opportunities for our very large working age population. I'm going to say a little bit about matching of skills. What we did was to look at a mapping, which many people have actually appreciated, and looking at the deficits between supply and demand. And we do that in terms of the demand for skills, which are the columns, and a set of ways in which we think about the supply of skills, different types of skills, and the educational attainment that kicks off that skilling. And the red dots here, of course, reflect where there is a gap, a serious gap. Yellow, perhaps partially met. Green is met. The black is where a typical worker has more skills than are needed in that particular occupation. And the reds clearly predominate. Again, different views on this. Here's a graph that's showing us that low productivity sectors really are employing the bulk of the workforce. And as you go up the high productivity ladder, we have fewer and fewer workers involved in that. So again, this is a serious issue of the matching of skills. Fixing these mismatches requires us to really be thinking much more beyond vocational skill training, where a lot of the emphasis has been. And we need to think beyond that in terms of how we can produce the skills or generate the skills in workers that allow them to find the jobs. there are more ideas that I hope we can get to in the panel discussion, because we have a wonderful group of people who will be talking about their own perspective on this with vast amounts of experience. But the focus, again, as I said, has to be on matching while you are looking at the generation of skills. And these are some examples. A very key and important aspect of the challenge we face in the matching area is connecting women to work. As I mentioned, the labor force participation rate in urban India for the female labor force participation rate has been declining. We're still trying to understand the dimensions of that phenomenon, but clearly preparing them for a modern workforce is going to be extremely important, and there's absolutely no way that India can reap the benefits of its demographic dividend unless that happens. So connecting women to work is going to be an extremely important of the matching challenge that we face. And as I said earlier, formalizing the informal, where we are able to recognize prior learning, we are able to certify informal skill acquisition. Those are going to be very important ways in which, and some of the audience here has been working on that in attempting to provide that kind of a certification that allows the informal worker also to begin to reap the benefits, even if they're not in a formal contractual job. I'm coming to the last part of the presentation on anticipating skills. And here what we did was to map skills across different occupations by the different types of skills. So there are cognitive skills here, and the darker the shade of green, the greater the complexity of the skill that's required. And along the columns we have hired workers and then entrepreneurial workers. Again, please refer to your report, because that has the chart in more readable form. But I just wanted to show that we do this for the cognitive, we do this for non-cognitive, and we do this for technical and sector skills. And again, one notices the large kind of issues that come up when you think about anticipating these skills over a period of time. What are some of the elements of future jobs that we should be thinking about? I think we are all very familiar with the disruption that technology is causing and will cause. But as Pramod Bhasin mentioned, you think about Uber and you think about the fact that it's probably created more jobs than any other technological aggregator or data aggregators, the way they think of themselves, not as a driver company. So how can we think about preparing people with the kinds of skills that will allow them to reap the benefits of the quantum leap in job generation that may result in hospitality, in healthcare, a number of areas where face-to-face contact is still going to be very important. And so, again, we need to be preparing for these elements of future jobs. The e-commerce sector and logistics is another area which has had tremendous potential and will continue to probably have tremendous potential. But underlying all of this is transferable skills that are relevant to multiple workspaces and not just to the one first job that you got. And as I said, the movement from lifetime employment to lifetime employability. However, we are faced with challenges here. We have gone from agriculture to services without the manufacturing stage in most, which has been predominant in most countries. So we've kind of lost out, and we almost have to recoup that ground now. But the nature of manufacturing is changing. So we've done some intense work on ITIs as well, and I hope Bonali can speak to that for a minute or two about the work that we've done. But a key element of the anticipating of skills is try to bring the skill acquisition as close to the employer as possible, to the extent that if we can do skilling on the job itself, that really is the best way to prepare for the future that is coming and for the transitioning from skills to 21st century jobs. Again, the report maps out a range of ways in which these new requirements for skills, without locking ourselves into a kind of very staid and stable trajectory of skill acquisition. We promote the basic skills, the foundational skills, the employability skills, and the entrepreneurial skills that allow us to meet with this uncertain future. We end the report with a set of recommendations for adapting and anticipating skills. The four players in this ecosystem, of course, starts with the regulator or the public policy element of this, which is the government, the skill providers in the private sector and in public sector, employers themselves, and finally and most importantly, the workers. And we have a set of recommendations that we provide. But the focus has not been on providing specific schemes that should be followed or specific programs that need to be designed. We've tried to create a foundation for thinking about these, and of course, as the work that we are doing progresses, we've started writing policy briefs, and there are 2 policy briefs that are already likely to be available shortly on our website. One deals with entrepreneurship and the application of this framework to the thinking about entrepreneurship, and Dr. Pallavi Chaudhary is here, who will be available for conversations afterwards, but she is working on a policy brief that's doing that, and Dr. Bhandari has also completed a policy brief on ITIs and how the application of this framework to ITIs helps us understand the potential as well as the problems in that sector. Let me ask Purnali to say a few words perhaps about that.
Good morning, everybody. So I think this framework, the acquiring, matching, and anticipating framework, could be applied to the model ITI scheme, which currently the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship is implementing. It's an ongoing process, but it's, if you think about it in a very simple manner, so the model ITI program is offering technical and vocational skills in our framework. So of course it leads to the acquisition of technical and vocational skills. But the way the program has been designed, it is that it's very important to have an industry partner. The model ITI has to have an industry partner. What the industry partner then does is, or at least the ones where are functional and working, the better cases, they're actually imparting standards of what is expected in the industry, what is the exact replicating the actual work environment, and then training the people in that work environment. So there's a particular industry, a particular firm which is a key partner in this model ITI scheme. They're teaching the language, they're teaching the work environment, they're teaching the model codes of conduct. So the whole set, the combination of skills to improve employability. And it does not come as a surprise that when you look at that specific program, that actually has 100% placement. Especially in the particular vocational skill of motor vehicles. So there's when you partner with industry, you're providing this on-the-job training, even this dual vocational programs actually help you to do a better matching of this scheme. But when you think about from the anticipating framework that, but how are you prepared for the 21st century? What happens if the technology changes? I think that's where the scheme needs further work. So, but when we start thinking, when we apply this AMA framework to the scheme, it actually forces you that how you can actually rework the scheme to make it more modern and more futuristic. So that's the basic idea of applying this AMA framework to a particular scheme.
Thank you, Purnali. I'm going to request Manisha Chadda to say a few words, because she is, of course, the one person who's triggered a lot of this work, and we are immensely grateful to JP Morgan for supporting this work over the last long time. It seems we've been working on it, but they've, this is the epitome of patient capital, where JP Morgan has been very kind to allow us to meander through these thought processes and end up here. Manisha.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. So thank you everyone for turning up today. It's a pretty large group, and we hope you find the research interesting. We started on this about 2 years ago, was it, Purnali? Yeah, about 2 years ago. So we'd been making grants, largely our philanthropic grants across the world in the area of jobs and skills and workforce readiness. And we started realizing that we have a lot of questions. In India, particularly when we talk to our peers in other institutions who are making these grants, a lot of us were sort of doing things intuitively, but we had no data to either validate what we were doing was right or wrong, or whether it would even have a real impact in the long term. And that's when we started speaking to NCAR to see that we're all doing stuff, we're all doing the right thing, hoping it will stick, hoping it will have some impact, but really there is no data out there. Is that something you can help us with? That triggered the research. There was just a lot to do. So what Dr. Shah calls meandering is more like navigating to figure out what are the right levers to actually come to this framework. And it has taken time. There's a lot of people who've been waiting for this outcome. But more than anything else, I'd just like to take a minute to sort of tell you what we've been doing so far and how we think that as JP Morgan, this research will have an impact on us and hopefully some of the other organizations, our peers, as well as training partners and so on. So when we started looking at jobs and skills in India, Dr. Shah spoke about the demographic dividend, and we clearly recognized that this is a great challenge for India to be able to leverage this demographic dividend that it has, while most of the other countries in the world are gearing up to deal with an aging population. We have here a workforce which is today at its peak. But even though it's a challenge, it's also a great opportunity. An opportunity for us to truly use this workforce to further our larger objective of inclusive economic growth. So we started looking at 3 elements to address. We started seeing, and some of this, it's nice to hear gets validated through the research. So we weren't so off the mark, which is really reassuring. We started supporting programs that do the school to work transition or education to employment. So a little bit about what Dr. Shah spoke, that how do you change and start embedding the idea of workforce readiness within the education system. That's something that we started looking at. We also started seeing, is it possible to start skilling people for not just jobs, but with jobs that offer career paths. So we started taking a futuristic lens that will these exist or not 5 years down the line. And lastly, though we touch upon it very briefly in this report, we actually got thinking about this element because of our early conversations with NCAR. And I know Dr. Chadha felt very passionate about this when we started talking about it, was can we take a look at things from the lens of women coming into the workforce and women staying in the workforce? And we all know the statistics. They're pretty stark in terms of the movements that have been in women in the workforce. In the report, you'll also find statistics of women in tech, which are abysmally low. So, when you're talking about a lot of STEM-related IT/ITS careers opening up in the next 5 years, the participation of women in technology is extremely low. So what does that mean in terms of disparity? For us, this report does a couple of things. One, like I said, it validates and tells us, all right, we weren't just so off the mark in all the work we've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. But more than that, it actually allows us to think in a more structured way in what we should be doing in the future. So effectively, I'm going to be asking Barnali to share this presentation with me as I structure my strategy for the next 3 years. That's the kind of opportunity it has. And that's what we really hope this report will help the sector at large. I think it provides incredible insight for trainers and practitioners to provide those skills which actually will be relevant for the young people of today in the next 5 to 10 years. That I think is very critical, and it's a responsibility. The second thing it will do is, the way we look at it is, it will help donors, investors, funders start channelizing resources in places which are going to have a real impact instead of doing what we've been doing for so long, which is throw it and see what sticks. And lastly, for policymakers, I think this is a trove of information, and Dr. Krishnan is here, and I'm sure he'll have a lot more to share about this. It provides literally the information and ammunition to start looking at skilling, jobs, Skill India, Make in India from a very, very unique but structured lens. And hopefully that's what it will do. It will allow policymakers to define, set, and shape the market in a way that is more conducive for us to go back and actually leverage our demographic dividend for economic growth. So I'll close with saying thank you so much. As is very apparent, we're super excited about this. So please forgive the gushing of what was meant to be a few words. But thank you so much for coming, and we'd love to see how this conversation can go further with all of you in this room. Thank you.
Manish, you not only gave us a grant, but you've given us such a great certificate that we're going to hang it up. Thank you so much. So we are actually well caught up on time. I'm going to request Dr. Krishnan to come on stage and please help us formally release this report in the usual Christmas tree fashion, where we're going to open the ribbon. And I've never quite understood where that tradition has come from, but I guess we're all, always fond of presents. So please, Dr. Krishnan. Please. I think we will call the panel as well. I'm not sure we have enough copies for everybody, but we just have, so I think we have just enough copies, and we will call the panel. No. These are Diwali colors. So we don't quite know who this girl is, but I think she epitomizes the hopes of an entire generation.